South Africa is edging closer to the local government elections. Concerns, however, continue to mount over declining youth voter participation. The Electoral Commission is ramping up efforts to reverse this trend through its annual Tertiary Institutions Campaign. Next week, Wednesday, the campaign heads to Taletso TVET College in Zeerust under the banner Save the Democracy, Save the Date. This initiative aims to encourage registration, voter education, and active civic participation amongst young people. But what is driving voter apathy among the youth? Is it disillusionment, lack of trust, or barriers within the political system itself?
I think it's very important to vote. I'm definitely going to vote because I feel like we need change in this country, and it can only start with the youth. For example, there's no employment for the youth of today, so I really hope my vote will help contribute to that, and everybody else's vote is going to help to contribute to that change.
No, I'm not going to vote. Looking at the state of our country, nothing is going right. Asinamanzi, as youth, we're not working, but then the government each and every year but then nothing ever changes. So I don't think it's necessary for me to vote because nothing ever changes.
I have never voted in my life, but I want to get into it because I see that we are the generation of the future. Therefore, we need to take part in what's happening in our country. Because if we don't voice out or don't actually participate, but we're expecting change, how do we expect that change to actually come about?
First of all, I'm exercising my right, and I also want my voice to be heard. And one vote makes a change. So I want to make a change. We are the change.
Let's speak to the Chief Electoral Officer, Mamabolo, as well as democracy builder, Lukhona Mnguni. Mr. Mamabolo, democracy is difficult. Voting is important. But getting people to turn out to vote is equally incredibly difficult. Like I said, our general voter turnout trend is edging downwards in a worrying way, particularly with the last national government elections, which seemed on par with the last local government election. In fact, local government election voter turnout is often slightly lower than the national general elections. Now, this year, of course, that headache persists. Do initiatives like the one you're undertaking now actually yield results if young people are being spoken to by non-partisan actors?
Indeed, we can never get tired of engaging with young persons, give them the necessary information related to civic and democracy education. And even if not all of them are able to register, one more will be much more important to increase confidence in the democratic life of the country. So we are going to Taletso TVET College on Wednesday, the 18th. We are launching the Tertiary Institutions Campaign. It's an activation. And the purpose of this thing is primarily twofold. One, to ensure that young persons engage in debates around civic and democracy education, and thereby hopefully enthuse them to participate in the forthcoming election. So that's the primary purpose of this activation. Secondly, to ensure that those that are entering TVET colleges for the first time have an opportunity to register to be on a voter's roll. Because until quite the recent elections, young persons, once registered, tended to vote in higher proportion.
That's a fascinating trend. And if you're a young person watching this conversation right now, I want you to perhaps give us a call. Talk to us. Tell us why it is perhaps that you're opting out of voting if that's a decision you're making, or why it is that you're encouraged to vote if that is the decision you're making. The number's on your screen right now. It's 011 714 0680 or 0681 or 0682. Give us a call. Talk to us. I'd love to hear from you. Lukhona, to assume that voting is the only way people participate in democracy, of course, is disingenuous, right? Just because people don't vote does not mean that they're not democratically active. Protest, for instance, which is ubiquitous across South Africa, is a form of democratic participation. but it doesn't yield the same sort of outcome and result that voting does. Why are people who are still democratically active divorcing themselves from voting?
Well, Oliver, good afternoon to you and, of course, Sai, our Chief Electoral Officer in the country, and your viewers. There is no doubt that there are many ways in which to participate in a democracy. In actual fact, one of the things that when we do voter conversations, people always are startled to find out is that you can actually deregister as a voter. Now, Sai, I'm not campaigning for anybody to deregister, but I'm just trying to highlight the fact that participating in elections, you've got the ability to register and deregister, and that is to continuously give you the choice to decide how best to participate. The reason why many of us would love to see as many people as possible engaging in the process of voting is because voting and elections themselves have a conversation about the legitimacy of the outcomes. Because even if one person votes, I often say this as an extreme example, even if one person votes, the IEC would have a duty to declare the election on the basis of that one person showing up. You can't say, we don't have a threshold that says the election is illegitimate if only 10% of the population votes and so on. But the citizens among themselves, as they're in conversation, could well say, we have no reason to believe in the authority of the state because the number of people who voted are a far greater minority than the number of people who are adults and could actually participate, what we call the voting age population, who could actually participate in the process of voting. And that's why you will hear, Oliver, some political parties and some commentators talking about questions around syncing the data from Home Affairs and the IEC and making, automatic voter registration. So instead of going out and registering people, when they turn 18, they get automatically registered. There are, of course, a number of philosophical debates and conversations around that, including people's rights and whether or not you circumvent them or not. And I think that's going to be a ripe conversation. But registering people in and of itself does not necessarily mean they're going to turn out on voting day. And this is not just a function of the IEC, this is also a function of the credibility of politics that political parties and independent candidates offer to South Africans. One of the things that is quite clear in some of the work and research that we have done is that people have lost faith in politics as a mechanism for transformative development in society. Whereas back then, during the liberation struggle, we understood that liberation would be important so that people can enjoy full franchise, so that everybody can have an equal vote of equal say and of equal weight. But given the quality of politics and the things that people are frustrated with, not everybody believes that voting gives them the same weight to change the situation. Some people even say in our work, all politicians are the same. Doesn't matter what color t-shirt they wear, it doesn't matter what color logo they give us. The reality is that as long as you are saying you are in politics, and that is why at some point I felt people are looking for solutions outside of the political process, the political system and the electoral system. And that's why if you look at the work that is done by Afrobarometer, which measures people's confidence in democracies across the continent and people's appetite for what some call the so-called benevolent dictator, you get to say a sense that there's a greater traction that we are seeing where people think that, elections, democracy, politics is no longer the way for them. They want more hard, decisive leaders who are not hell-bent by the processes of democracy, including public participation. And we can talk about those things. Whereas public participation was actually meant to give people a voice, even those who don't vote in the governance process. But you find that people are saying, no, I don't want to be consulted sometimes. I just want someone who decides and they act on my behalf.
Yeah. Sai, we often speculate about why these people don't vote, but it's important that we get actual data. And I would assume that the IEC conducts surveys. They get on the ground and they ask people, why is it that the 10 million of you who are of voting age choose not to register to vote? And why is it that of the those who are registered to vote, half of them, almost half of them just decided the last time around we did this to not turn out to vote? What does the data tell us around the answers people are giving us?
One of the primary factors that people advance for not wanting to vote is the fact that the institutions of representation or institutions of democracy are losing legitimacy. People view them with great skepticism unlike the case previously 10, 15 years ago. That's really a primary reason that research is telling us that people are not quite happy with the performance of institutions of democracy and institutions of representation, such as parliament, provincial legislatures, municipal councils, and so on and so on. And the fact that democratic institutions are on a downward scale in terms of rating by the general voters. But you'd also have to be alive to the fact that there is backsliding of democracy in many parts of the world. So this is not a uniquely South African phenomenon. We find this in major democracies around the world, and there's literature to that effect. So we've got to locate our difficulty and challenge within that context of an international world where democracy as a viable system of arranging public affairs is on a backwards slide. Now, the duty of the IEC is to engage with people such as we're doing with this Tertiary Institutions Campaign, to ensure that people understand that, even with the difficulties that we have, the answer is not to opt out of democracy, but to remain engaged and make choices within the system, find solutions within the systems rather than opting out of the system. Because anything to the contrary spells mayhem for the country, spells even possibly a dictatorship. So we've got to stay located within the democratic experience. That's what we agreed upon when we adopted the Constitution in 1996.
Yeah. Well, give us a call, 011-714-0680 or 0681 or 0682. Give us that call. Tell us what you make of this conversation. Let's go to the lines. Bucky out in Sasolburg is on the line. Bucky, what's your comment or question? Go for it.
Thank you so much for giving me that opportunity. So I don't see is it necessary for me to go back to the vote. Apparently, when we can check it 30 years ago, so we're still living in the same situation. We're still not getting the services that we deserve to get. So apparently, I think there's no need. There's no need to go back to make somebody rich or his friends rich, because we can look back to Zondo Commission. Nothing has been done. So we can look now at the Matanga Commission. So they're still trying to debate. There's nothing that is happening. So apparently this government that we are in now is a waste of time, maybe to tell or to ask somebody to go and vote again. Because we're voting for somebody to get rich and his friends and the family, but they don't care about the vulnerable people that are staying in this country.
Yeah.
So I don't see the reason why we have to.
Yeah. Pagi, thank you so much for that call. Really do appreciate it. Lukhona, what you're hearing there seems to be commonplace in South Africa. That's a view of not just an isolated man from Sasolburg, but one that spreads across the country. Is there a correlative relationship between noticeable improvement in living conditions and voter turnout or democratic participation by and large?
Well, I mean, this talks to the heart of what we often call the democratic dividend. So what has democracy materially delivered to people beyond, almost people feeling that democracy demands far more from them than it offers back to them at a development level. So at a day-to-day, if you see incomplete infrastructure in your community, or if a project for water was done and then the water pump got, affected, had a breakdown, and then it was taken away from your community, and then it doesn't ever return, and therefore you go back to rain harvesting, water harvesting, and then you go back to getting water at the river and so on. Of course, for some people, there is a relationship between that and their decision not to vote. In actual fact, one of the things that has made the work of the IEC over the years is exactly this issue, where people then see voter registration weekends, special voting days, and voting days as means for them to voice their way on service delivery grievances. And then they obstruct the work of the IEC as a way of trying to frustrate the state. Not that the IEC delivers services, but because people will attack any available, institution of state that is as close to them as possible as a way of registering their grievances against the state. And of course, yes, when you continuously see commissions of inquiry whose recommendations are shelved and not implemented properly, of course, people will then feel that in actual fact, democracy has even made and created systems and institutions for wrongdoers to insulate themselves from accountability, but create the optics of trying to do something. So there's no doubt that people will lose greater faith in democracy when the development is not there. But you can juxtapose this with other jurisdictions across the world. And as Sai said, we don't necessarily need to see this as a uniquely South African thing. There are countries which are quite well developed, even including some of the well-praised Scandinavian countries in Europe. They don't have the highest rates of participation. In actual fact, you talk to people from Sweden, and they talk about how they are worried that people are disengaging from politics and allowing space for business people to play a role much more there, which may affect democracy in the long run. So I think democracy will always have the jury out, but it works better when those who are elected to govern actually do that which they are elected to do. Once they continuously do not appear to be doing that which they are elected to do, people then lose faith in that process. The last thing, Oliver, of course, is a sense that people feel their representatives are too far, particularly at the national and provincial spheres of government. And that's because of the nature of the electoral system in those spheres. There have been attempts to try and talk about reforms in that system, in that process. But of course, the reform process itself is just marred by political meddling that doesn't allow the process to move very far. In the last Electoral Act amendment that happened, there was a clause put in that a panel must be appointed. The minister appointed a panel, but the panel actually came out with two different reports that are not in one report, so there's no unified report. And now Parliament has tried to give the panel a deadline to say, I think by the end of February, there must be a unified report that is that can be tabled to the portfolio committee on home affairs, so that this issue, is debated with society and people can have an opportunity beyond the experts that were appointed to the panel. But ordinary people can have an opportunity to contribute to the debate as to how does our electoral system also gets reimagined so that it can help people to feel that they know who they are voting for, and it can help people to then feel that there is a value for them to vote rather than feeling that they are being hoodwinked by political parties that come to them from election to election.
Yeah. Lukhona, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Lukhona Mnguni, democracy builder, as well as Mamabolo, who is the Chief Electoral Officer. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon.